And look, Southern Miss deserved it. They deserved to win. They outplayed us. They were the better team. LSU put themselves in a position to win the series. They had 2 opportunities to win, and they lost both games. And the reason why they lost both games were because they weren't able to limit the damage. Like, they weren't able to shut down Southern Miss
what
was
the score yesterday? Yesterday's game?
7-4, something like that. But it was, LSU's up 4. They're up early.
The only reason why I'm saying it is because I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, all right, 2-0 lead. These teams played 3 games, 1 extra inning game. Man, if we could keep this game, like, it's going to be hard. I would not have imagined you get a 7-run game and an 8-run game that in a situation where you, in a way, kind of had a lot more to play for you than the pitching staff that the other team had. And it didn't work that way.
And look, you can't blame it on the offense because they were able to score the runs when they needed to score and put themselves in a position. I'm not blaming it necessarily on, like, all the staff. I'm just saying that the bullpen, I think, was worn down. They threw a lot of innings through now, Southern Miss team was worn down too. But the difference is their bullpen hadn't had as many innings.
Well, I'm just talking
and stressful innings on their arm throughout the course of the year.
Just think about the last 3 weeks that LSU went through of the season.
Mm-hmm.
And then you come into this situation. Like I said, I thought that week off would have done a lot more for those guys, and it showed that it didn't.
We just didn't get. I was hoping that one or two starters would get us to the 6th, and we never got that. And you have to credit Southern Miss for being able to do that. You have to credit Southern Miss for putting together the at bats and putting pressure, because it wasn't like LSU made a ton of errors. Now there were some plays maybe in the outfield that should have been made that weren't errors, but it wasn't like they were booting balls all over the place. Now we had a couple miscues, or at least one big one today. But you're not – like, the errors weren't the issue. It was just not being able to put guys away and giving up, a lot of 2-out runs.
We weren't able to get – not even much put them away. We weren't able to get ahead of guys early and kind of have them having defensive at-bats, if you will. Didn't do enough of that today, and believe it or not, a couple more timely hits would have really got
Unbelievable. Yeah, I mean, that's really was the story of the series to me, to be honest. Like, get a couple of hits. You have the bases loaded with Bianco up. You got to get something there. You had so many opportunities with runners in scoring position. 1 out, 2 straight outs, boom, inning over. You never got far enough ahead.
But here's the deal: you always had the opportunity. You had it goes and look, it goes both ways. Like, I'm with you. Like, they had the opportunity to put the game away
early,
but at the same time, every time you put up runs, Southern Miss came back and put up runs. So every time you had a big inning, Southern Miss would keep you out there for 30 minutes. And they would score some runs. So now you're coming in and you're not hot anymore.
Which we kept talking about throughout this game. It wasn't even so much if they were putting up the runs or not. Just by them keeping you out there in the hot sun, it's a fully turfed field. If you've never been on a turf field when the sun's up,
your feet start hurting.
The heat is literally rising. So they're standing out here through these long at-bats, through these replays, and it's hard to come back into the dugout and get hits in those situations. And I'm not sitting here giving excuses. Like, it just is what it is. We talked about it, how we needed to see more first hitter outs, more quicker at-bats, and getting these guys on and off the field.
And to get ahead in counts.
Yeah.
Right? Like, you can't, like, the pitching staff the entire game, really the entire series –
definitely this game
was working behind. Like, they made it more difficult on themselves because they were behind in the counts, and then they were allowing guys to gear up for heaters. And then when you were ahead of the counts, you were missing your spot just enough for the guy to get hits. And like I said, it goes twofold. You have to credit Southern Miss for being able to do that and make those pitches count. And you have to look at the staff and you're like, man, I feel like we left a little bit out there. I'm not, like I said, it's a team game. It's a team effort. And, they go hand in hand. You would assume, like, the guys on the staff now coming back, like, you've got to know going into the offseason and going into the fall of next year and summer ball, wherever you're going, you're like, all right, the rotation's up for grabs. Every spot in the rotation next year is up for grabs. So you would take that and say, okay, and they're probably going to have exit meetings with Jay, and they're they're probably going to have these conversations, and Jay's probably going to have a plan for these guys and tell them what he wants to see either over summer during summer ball or through the course of the offseason, like working out and training, getting ready for next year. They're going to have that conversation, and Jay is going to say, hey, listen to me. We don't have any guys in rotation, but we have help coming in. I'm willing to bet they got some recruits coming in that are going to help immediately on the mound. I'm willing to bet that he's probably going to be in the transfer portal, bringing guys in that are going to help immediately on the mound. And there's going to be – those conversations are going to be tough, but as a player and as a guy who is coming back, and they've showed – look, they have guys in the bullpen that have good stuff. They have good velocity, and but they haven't been able to put it together to be a starter. You got to go out this summer, and you got to go figure something out, because if not, he's going to get somebody to go and replace you. Because this isn't a job where you can go out and lose in the regional 2 or 3 times in a row and expect to have your job, and Jay knows that. And there's a lot of ups and downs, some good, some bad, and I think Jay knows, like, he needs to have pitching staff that can get you in. He needs to have 2 guys that can get you deep in games. And, it's going to be up to those guys that are there to prove to him that they're the guys, or he's going to go out and get someone to replace them. That's all I got to say about that.
And people are saying these are, in the comments, like, these are pulmonary players. Like, well, not necessarily. You brought in a lot of people to the transfer portal, but
here's my rebuttal to that. The players that you're saying are Palm-and-Aries players, and you want to talk about recruiting, the number 1 recruiting class in the country is at LSU from Palm-and-Aries class. Dylan Cruz's class, number 1 team in the country, number 1 recruiting class in the country. You go out, and they brought in some good pieces, but you have guys in there that, you've had a couple bullpen guys that came in. Gervais was already coming before Jay got here, and Gervais has been great. Raiselman comes in. That was a Jay guy. Cooper comes in. That was a Jay guy. But you have talent on your team that was able to perform for you. You bring in Barry. That was the one addition to the lineup. But, and it sucks that Dugas got hurt for most of the year. But you can't tell me that there is no talent on the team. You have 4 All-Americans on your team coming into the year. You added another All-American in the lineup.
I don't think.
And I'm not saying that it's Jay's fault. I'm not saying that it's anybody's fault. But to come out and say that these are Maneri's players, that's an easy cop-out excuse. That's
okay, well, let's just go with this. If these are Maneri's players, if that's what we're going to go with, you ended the season with the number 2 hitting team in the league and a number 3 or 4 pitching team in the league. I would imagine that's pretty good enough to go deep into a playoff run. So we can't sit here and say, oh, the player's this, the play, in the sense of who they're for and who they're not. It doesn't really matter.
Well, the same team got to a super last year.
And I'll say this too, with the Jacob Berry situation, like, the guy had a great year this year.
Yeah.
He's going to probably be a top 10 draft pick this year. I'm not saying anything to undermine what he's done this year, but because of the year that Gavin had this year, you can basically say that was a wash and a step in, because Gavin, for the most part, pretty much did what he did this year.
Yeah, Gavin hit 19 homers. He led the league in RBIs last year.
RBIs and homers.
Yeah. I don't know if it was home, but it was close. He had 19.
It's close.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So, like, what you got out of Berry this year was obviously more in the average department, but you got a lot of that out of Gavin last year. And you didn't have Gavin this year. So it's not like –
And if you want to talk about the same players, you have the same players, and they're playing defense, and our defense was worse than it was last year, right? And look, that sometimes those things happen, and sometimes those are anomalies and flukes in a season. And I'm not saying they're not talented enough, because they are. They proved that last year they were better than they were this year defensively. But to say, oh, it's Maneri's players, that to me is a lazy excuse and a lazy take. Because, yeah, they were his players, but they also were the number 1 recruiting class in the country.
Right.
You also had a guy that was his player that had a 2.4 ERA in Vittmeyer. You also had a guy who brought in as Gervais, who was your best reliever. You also had a guy, Mikael Hilliard, who was a senior, who was your Friday night guy, and he was the only guy that gave any stability to your lineup, to your rotation. So to go out there and say that, it's not accurate to me.
You'd have to bring a little more substance.
Like,
to it.
It's not accurate. And now maybe they haven't developed.
Wait, time out. And if you really want to go ahead and say that, okay, well, those same Maneri's players were 2 games away from an Omaha appearance last year. can't be that bad.
That's my point. They got to
a super last year.
And I'm not, like I said, I don't want to say, I'm not saying this is a failure, but I'm just responding to someone saying that it's Maneri's players. Like, that's not, to me, that's not a viable
doesn't mean
excuse. That means nothing. Like, Maneri,
I think they're saying
coming into a team with the caliber of team of LSU, usually you're coming in when a guy gets fired and they're not good. That's why a guy got fired. That wasn't the case. Maneri retired. He stepped down. He retired from baseball, and he left a super regional team that had the best player in college baseball that's only a sophomore, a top 10 pick that was coming in. Obviously, Jay brought him in. An All-American in Cade Doty, who was projected first, second rounder. Trey Morgan, who was a freshman All-American. Gavin Dugas, who bided his time at LSU and ended up hitting 19 homers and led the league in RBI. So you are leaving a chest full of
a treasure trove.
Yes. And to say that Maneri left him in a bad spot is not
I don't know if that's exactly what they're saying. I think he's saying more of wait till he gets his guys in.
And that's fine. Yeah. That's fine.
Because he's bringing in the number one recruiting class as well, or at least a
no
top
doubt.
recruiting class.
And that's how it should be. But listen to me. Let's not get it twisted. There's number one recruiting classes coming in the country all the time, right? Now, I will say the one thing Jay does differently than Coach Maneri did was he gets in the portal, and that's relatively new. But Jay is all up in the portal, and I think that is going to be the difference in recruiting. It's not bringing in talent from high school because that's never been an issue, ever, and it's hard to project people to come in and
it's hard to have that many guys step in year one and
and it's hard to project it. Look, listen,
just is.
He came in, they had a pretty good recruiting class. Out of that recruiting class that Jay Mitch came in, there's probably 3 guys out of that class that actually made a difference, maybe 3 or 4. The next year, number 1 recruiting class in the country after LSU had the worst year they've had in forever, right? That recruiting class had LeMahieu, Gibbs, Renato. They had a bunch of guys that came in, Leon. They had a bunch of guys that came in through that class, right? My class, the 2008 recruiting class /9, we weren't touted. Austin Nola was the most highly touted guy we had coming in, and we didn't come in with the hype of being the number 1 recruiting class in the country. But I started, Austin started, Matty Yacht started, Tyler Hanover started, all in that 2009 team that had the 2 of the top recruiting classes coming in the country. My point to all of this is saying it is hard to project a high school kid to come in and make that adjustment to college. Oh boy, I was getting in the face. I'm not saying it's a crapshoot, but like it is hard, you know. Now with like different stats and more cameras and stuff, like you kind of give a better read. But like it is a difficult thing to say. Okay, I'm gonna expect this kid to come in and play right away. There's an adjustment period. Like
it's a jump.
I mean, these guys are throwing more consistently harder than when we were here. Like you're coming out the pin, you're facing guys throwing mid to upper 90s regularly now, and you've never seen that consistently in high school. I mean, that's, you know, I don't want to. I'm not coming at anybody's throat, but that's my whole point with this thing is like, yeah, Jay is going to bring his guys in to fit his style, but you know, pitching and defense is everybody's style.
Have to play it.
Have to do it, and you have to play it, and they know that. And Jason Kelly is a great pitching coach, and Jay's a great recruiter, and he has hands on, he understands it, and he's going to go out and make those adjustments, right? Like the problem is the guys that we brought in that are talented and have the arms did not make the adjustment this year to be that guy that was anticipated. Now they still have a long ways to go. Like you have guys coming out the bullpen throwing 97 that are starters. Grant Taylor touches 98. Like you have guys that have the juice. Ty Floyd was 94, 98 SC tournament. You have guys like that. And you can see they're starting to make it. Now you have to hope that they make the jump next year.